Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Standout Job Seeker podcast presented by Jobscan. I'm your host, Sydney Myers, and in this episode, I interviewed Chris Stambolidis, who is a former recruiter from Amazon. We talked about, I'm going to get into it. It's a really, really great conversation. But before you skip to the interview, because I do that too, I skip intros in podcasts. I don't even know why I do an intro for mine. But, anyways, I have two really important things to tell you about. So, listen to these two things. First, if you are listening to or watching this podcast before December 6th, 2024, we are running our Black Friday promotion and we're having a really great discount on Jobscan Premium. So you can get Jobscan Premium for 12 months, the annual plan for 50% off. So you can get the annual plan for $179. That's 50% off. To give you some context there, Jobscan Premium typically costs $50 a month. So for the price of 3-4 months, you can get a full year of Jobscan Premium. And with the way the job search is going and how long it's lasting, it's definitely a good deal. So if you want to get that 50% off of the annual plan, go to jobscan.co/promo/BF24. That's BF as in Black Friday. This isn't a discount code, so if you just go to Jobscan and sign up, you're on the checkout page, there's no place to enter a promo code. We keep our promos really exclusive, so you have to use this special URL, jobscan.co/promo/BF24. I'll also put it in the show notes and in the description for this. So take advantage of that. That promotion ends December 6th, 2024. Second important thing, which is like not as important, but I had some technical difficulties with the video portion of this. So the last 5 minutes of the conversation, there's no video for Chris Stambolidis, the person who I interviewed. So it's just me on camera, but you can still hear him. Now, if you're listening to this, that's not a problem at all. You won't even notice a difference. But just FYI, I apologize for that. The video got a little bit corrupted. But it's still a really great conversation, so I encourage you to listen to the whole thing. Chris Stambolidis is an executive career coach and former recruiter from Amazon and a few other companies. And what we talked about was the executive job search. So that would be people like C-suite VPs, directors, and so on. And that might not be you, but I still think this conversation is relevant to everyone, really, because what we really dug into within the executive job search is networking and how to do it and why it's so important. And I've done episodes on networking before. I did an interview with Kenneth Lang. Highly recommend listening to that one. But this one is a little different because you get to hear about it from the perspective of a recruiter. So, like, how do you network with recruiters, or how do you build connections with recruiters? What does a recruiter look for? I think hearing that perspective is really important, and there's so much value in this conversation. So that's what we talked about. That's what you're going to get out of this interview. Let's get to it now with Chris Stambolidis. This is a great conversation. So let's get into it now. Thanks for listening. Okay, well, I am joined now by Chris Stambolidis. I got it right. Yay, me. Chris, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Chris is a former recruiter from Amazon. He's now an executive career coach. So we're going to have so much insights to unpack. I'm sure we're going to talk about this topic of the executive job search and if it's different, why it's so different, how networking plays a part in there. Chris, welcome. I want to give you a chance to introduce yourself and kind of give the audience a little bit of information about who you are and the expertise that you bring to the table.
I appreciate you. Thank you so much for inviting me. By the way, I'm very excited. And yeah, just a little bit about me. I used to be an executive recruiter, and then later I also recruited for some time at Amazon, and moved kind of into the executive headhunting. And then later on, or what I do now, is mainly focus on career coaching, and pretty much resume writing, LinkedIn cover letter, and basically helping executives get hired. And I mainly focus on kind of the C-suite in financial services and yeah, tech and fintech. Those are kind of my areas of expertise.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's what I kind of focus on right now.
Okay, great. Yeah. And I think that you'll have so much to share from being on both sides of it. So you've been a recruiter for executive roles, and then now you help job seekers getting executive roles. So you've been on both sides of the table. So I'm really curious to just like kind of pick your brain here. So I want to start just kind of like by setting the table. We're talking about the executive job search. What exactly would you define as the like as an executive role? Just so we know who we're talking to. If you're listening, is this for you? What roles qualify as executive?
I think it's really depends on the perception or the point of view that you have, and also like other factors like location and where you're kind of based out of that plays a big role, or like even the industry that you're in. Just because somebody might be an executive that's in a let's say making $100,000 a year type of position, but somebody else might say, well, you're actually just an executive if you're kind of in the three, four, 500K and above range. So I think like you can't really quantify it, but I think that in terms of like what an executive is, typically somebody that is not just doing kind of like technical tasks, but that really has more of like strategic oversight, that is maybe typically leading like a larger team of, let's say, at least like 10, 15 plus people. But yeah, so I think that there's a couple of different angles in terms of, how to identify an executive. I don't think that there's one right answer, but like, from my perspective, for example, the people that I would work with are typically, people that are at the vice president, senior vice president, or C-suite level and above, and typically kind of in the range of, let's say, $350,000 and above in terms of salary. But again, I think that for everyone, it's probably different
Yeah.
how you'd identify it.
Okay, okay. So this would be anything like maybe not like manager, but probably at least like director, head, VP, like
Correct.
that kind of
Correct.
okay, those roles.
And
Okay.
again, like depending even on like the company or like different companies, for example, the senior vice president or a head and one bank might be, very much like a different level, or like what that means might be different at a different bank. So I think that there's like a lot of differences or nuances there as well, right? But yeah, you're right. Like definitely above the managerial level, I would say.
Okay, okay. Okay, good to know. So basically, this could be a wide range of people, depending on I think like a good point you make is depending on the company because different companies might have the same job title, but the role is totally different. So it's not always apples to apples. So okay. So then now that we have that established, we kind of know who we're talking to here. What makes the executive job search different, or is it different? Like, do the same rules apply for when you're doing as like applying for a director or VP role? Do the same rules apply for the resume, interviewing, networking, or is it like totally different?
I think that I would say that it's totally different. And the main factor or the main reason for that is typically if you're at the executive level, what matters, or what's going to make the difference in terms of your job search is like, yes, it's important to have a good resume, LinkedIn cover letter, all of that stuff. But what's really going to make that big difference is like your network. Who are you connected with? How are you? And then also like, how are you approaching those types of conversations? And then also like the relationships that you've built throughout your career, or even like if you haven't done that yet, like how are you building those relationships with like executive recruiters, headhunters, and like different decision makers? That's typically like how, at least the people that I will work with get hired, right? It's like having a good network, or like creating that good network and approaching the search from like a strategic point versus, if you're someone that's maybe at a bit of more of a junior level, you'll typically just be applying for positions online. That's not how
Mhm.
like an executive would find their job. Like you're not going to find like a CEO position or like a C-suite level position like online. And if they are, then they're just posted. But like that's typically even like recruiters. Like recruiters will go out and search for the executive that they want to hire on LinkedIn, right? Versus, going through the applications that come in. So I think that's kind of like a huge difference, I would say, in terms of like the search. And obviously that's just one piece of it, right? But
Yeah.
yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so you said um relationships with recruiters. Now, that surprised me because I was thinking this meant relationships with just other people, like colleagues or whatever, which
Mhm.
might be included with it. But I didn't realize that like you should develop relationships with recruiters. Is that right?
100%. Like, and not just like a specific person, but like even like the first thing that I will do if I'm working with someone on their resume, LinkedIn, all of that stuff, when that's done, we will pick out 30 to 40 different search firms. So like whether that be like bigger ones like Korn Ferry or like smaller search firms that are hired by companies to hire executives, right? And we
Mhm.
will actually go onto their websites and have a look into like what are the openings that they're listing on their websites, because those are often not listed on LinkedIn because yeah, it's very expensive to post jobs on LinkedIn. But like a lot of these search firms, like they don't need to do that, right? Even just by posting it directly on their website, they will have a ton of people that will be applying. Plus, they will actually be the ones that are searching for people or searching for jobs, right? So, like if you're an executive and you have all of your materials or your application materials in shape, the first thing that I would recommend is like go into your industry and like obviously like location and all of that stuff matters as well. And find like at least 30 to 40 different recruiting or headhunting firms. Go into their website and have a look into like what are the openings that they're posting. And then B, like very important is like you'll have a section where you can actually submit your resume so that if, 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks from now, they have a job opening, like the first thing that you will do as a recruiter is like to see, hey, who do we have on file that has submitted their resume, right? So that'd be like first thing that you want to do, so that all of these like search firms have you on file for like the case that they get hired to hire someone, right? And then like
Mhm.
even if like a lot of times, that's like a big thing that most executives like never had to deal with this before. But now like you have to be the person that is like active. Like they used to just get tapped on the shoulder and like, hey, here's your next position. Like now it's more like the job seeker is the one that is kind of going in and being like proactive. Like if you go into these search firms, you'll find, contact buttons or like phone numbers of like recruiters. And, I have, for example, the people that I work with, like cold call the recruiters and just spark a conversation and say like, hey, I recently applied to, position X that you have posted. I'm really interested. I'd love to find out more about the role. Would you be open to having a first conversation? Like that's typically what like executives will have to do, to land the role, right? Um,
Okay. Interesting. So then, so you wouldn't necessarily be applying for jobs like on Indeed or something, but you would go directly to a recruiting firm and kind of like apply for the job there, or at least like submit your resume for like to be in their database. Is that right?
I mean, yeah, that's part of it, right? A big part of it.
Okay.
Obviously, you're still going to go on LinkedIn and search for like positions, right? But like even some of these recruiting firms or even some of these companies will post a job on LinkedIn, right, and say, hey, we're looking for a CFO, for example. Like most people or most executives would just submit with like LinkedIn Easy Apply and hope that they get a
Mm,
call back. But like what you need to actually do is press the company name, right? Go into their website. And then most of the times, for example, if it's a recruiting firm, you will find the person that's responsible for the job and like their phone or email and call them, right? Or reach out to them and say,
okay.
hey, I just applied. I'm really interested. Like that's typically like, stuff that executives will have to do because there's just, not a lot of these types of roles that, at that salary level that they can find. So it's really about like setting yourself apart from the competition. And obviously, like, I mean, at the junior level or like even mid level, people are struggling with that as well, but it's not like to an extent where you're like really active in terms of like building those relationships like that. Right.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay. Interesting. You said that so those recruiters at at the firms, they will first like search their database to see who's already in there, and then they'll go in addition to that, they'll try to source, so when they're searching, how like, are they just searching for, like are they doing it by keyword or, like, what are they looking for when they're going through those resumes?
Typically LinkedIn Recruiter is the tool that
Oh,
recruiters
okay.
will be using, right? So like if I don't have a candidate that is a good fit for like a position on file, I will go into LinkedIn Recruiter, right, which is the separate version of LinkedIn where you as the recruiter can
Mhm.
basically see what does the market look like? Who's open to work, right? And you can basically say, hey, I'm looking for a chief operating officer, do like a search. And now everyone that is a chief operating officer or has that title will come up and you'll see like, okay, there's, for example, 5.5 million people that are chief operating officers that are open to work. So what I'm going to do next is I'll start filtering out, there's a section where you can start filtering out by skills, keywords, and like, background details, which is the next step that you will do, right? Which is why like most executives, don't really care about their LinkedIn, but it's so important because like if you don't have, for example, your top 5 skills listed on your profile, or if you don't have like the keywords that match the jobs that you're targeting, you will not be popping up in the search if I, as the recruiter or headhunter, am searching for, a chief operating officer with a background in X, Y, and Z, right? Um,
Yeah.
so I think that's typically like the step-by-step process. And again, like where most executives, like how they will get hired is not like you applying, but like somebody reaching out to you and saying like, hey, I have this opportunity. I saw your profile. I'm really interested in having a first conversation with you. Here's the job description. Are you open to have this first interview? Right. Like that's for example, for me, like 80% of my clients will get hired by somebody reaching out to them, after like their LinkedIn and stuff is obviously
Okay.
optimized and saying like, hey, I have this job, let's have an interview versus like them applying for a job, right? Like that likelihood at the executive level, if you just, cold applying and like
Mhm.
hearing something is so, so small, right?
Oh,
So yeah,
okay. So then, yeah, I will say, I've been in the LinkedIn recruiter tool and it gets really granular. Like I've tested a lot of ATSs in terms of how they can search and filter candidates, but LinkedIn recruiter is like a whole other level. There are so many fields that you can narrow down the candidate pool by. And so yeah, having your LinkedIn profile like completely filled out and optimized is really important for that. So then like should like applying for the job still matters, right? Or is that not even worth doing? Is it more about the networking part of it?
I mean, if you are somebody that's out there looking for a job and you see a job that is posted on LinkedIn or Indeed and it's a perfect fit and you want to apply, like, sure, yes, obviously you're going to be applying, but I would just say
Okay.
what matters, like, is what are you doing after that, right? Like, are you going into, LinkedIn and trying to find someone, that is either within your network or somebody new? Are you trying to find their email address or like their phone number? And are you making that extra step of reaching out to them and trying to connect and to basically get your application in front of the right person? If you're cold applying, like that would be what you'd
Mhm.
want to do to kind of like follow up and actually generate traction, right? But
Okay.
yes, obviously, like at that level, like relationships and kind of how you go about networking, like that would typically be what matters the most, right?
Okay. Okay, so this is more like all the other stuff like goes without saying. Like of course you're going to
Correct.
have a great resume that's optimized, tailored, you're going to be applying for the job. Like you're going to do all the normal job search stuff, but
Right.
this is like the next level of what you need to do to get those kinds of roles. So then
Yep.
like, okay, so then digging into like networking and using LinkedIn, I guess you kind of answered a lot of it with like how they would actually connect with recruiters. Is there an element of using LinkedIn to just build a network, like build connections with other colleagues, like other executives, or are you saying it's more just reaching out to the recruiter directly?
Okay, totally. A great question. And like, this is where most people will kind of, have a significant lag in their job search or like why it takes a long time. It's like most people start the process of like networking when it's too late, right? When you've been like laid off and like now you're on the market. And then they will start reaching out to peers or colleagues or like former colleagues saying like, hey, I'd love to connect with you and I want to find out more about this job. Can you give me a referral? Can you help me or whatever?
Mhm.
Like that's too late, right? Like the best way to like network is like if you're giving a favor, right? Or if you're helping someone when you're like employed or like when you're, obviously like in a good position. If somebody and if you're just networking with people like without having an agenda or wanting something, that's where it's like
Okay.
effective, right? The least effective is like, oh, I've been laid off. Like, can you help me? People will typically,
Mhm.
not be like in the mood, for that type of conversation, right? But yes, obviously, if you're on them, if you've just been laid off and now you're searching and you're like, hey, how can I start my networking? Like the best way to start that process is, for example, on LinkedIn, right? If you go into, like, if you press that little icon on your profile and you go into like settings, and if you go into data privacy, you can actually then download a list of your entire LinkedIn network, like anyone that you're connected with,
Oh,
and you can filter it out by company name, position, job title, and then you'll have like an Excel spreadsheet basically of everyone that you're connected to on LinkedIn, right? And then like first step that I will always tell my clients is okay, let's start filtering out by talent acquisition, recruiters, headhunters, right? And see, okay, how many people in your network are either recruiters or related to like talent acquisition or whatever. And let's start reaching out to those first, right? And say, hey, I noticed that you're currently recruiting at company X. That's really interesting. I've been wanting to find out more. Your background seems super interesting. Would you be open to having a quick 10 to 15-minute chat with me next week? Like that's kind of step one, right? Step two, let's do that with like your peers, former colleagues, or like even people that you don't know, right? But that you're connected with and start building that
okay.
pipeline, right? But obviously, if you're somebody, that's laid off or that isn't currently like working, like typically you will be like less attractive, right? In terms of like people actually wanting to talk to you. So like the conversion of that, like typically I will see like 20%, right? So let's say you're reached out to like 10 people, two or three might reply. But even that is already helpful, right? Like you only need that one
Yeah, true.
conversation that leads to something. But yeah, that's typically how I'd start, kind of the process of like networking, right?
Okay.
Um,
So on that note of like building these connections, say so like the best time to do it is now before you're laid off. So
right.
the thing I always wonder is like how does a person build genuine connections? Because a lot of times it's like I get a connection request, I don't really know who that person is, and I'm like, their work experience seems interesting. I connect, but then like we never talk to each other. And then I see I'm connected and I'm like, I don't even know who so like how could a person use LinkedIn to build genuine connections with someone they've, like, maybe never met in person?
Mhm. I love that, and I think that yeah, it goes or ties back into like doing it before you need something, right? And like to give you an
Mhm,
example, I recently had um like a client and he got hired for like a sales director position, right? And he had done that like typical post of like, hey, I'm starting my new position, at company X, and then everyone starts congratulating him. And somebody had reached out to him personally by message that was not actively looking for a job, but he had said, hey, this sounds really cool. I'd love to just chat with you and find out more about what that company is doing. Right. And he was a sales manager. And so they had a first conversation. And over like the course of 3 or 4 months, they just kept in touch and they connected, obviously, during that, conversation on like what they're doing professionally, but also,
mhm,
hey, what are some of your interests like outside of work or whatever? And they just connected. Right. And so this guy who was the sales director was hired to actually build out their sales team. And at that point when they initially connected, he wasn't at that stage where he was hiring. But
mhm.
3.5 months later, when he started, to kind of build out that team, that person that had reached out to him to just like say, "Hey, congrats," right, was the first person that he hired, right? Um,
Oh,
and so, like, I think that's like a great example of like, okay, you're reaching out, to say congrats or like to ask something about that person rather than, hey, can you help me or like, can you do something for me? Like, that's typically how authentic conversations or like
yeah.
relationships are built, right? It's like you give something first and then you get something back, right? Rather than like the opposite way around. Like that's typically
Mhm.
not how you'll get something out of it.
Yeah. So it's not about the number of connections you have, it's about the number of conversations you have. Like, your goal should be to have conversations with people, not just, like, build up the number of connections.
Yeah, 100%. And I think like even how you act, again, like at the executive level, this might be slightly different, but like how you act like after the conversation, for example, matters a lot as well, right? So Like to give you an
Oh,
example, recently somebody had reached out to me and said like, "Hey, I know that person X. I'm currently struggling with my resume. Can you help me?" And I had given her some free tips and advice during like a quick call, and she had followed up with me after that and sent me like this gift that was like Greek olive oil, right? Because I'm Greek. She was like, "Hey,
oh,
I'm gonna send you this like small gift. Thank you so much for your help and all that stuff." And a couple of weeks later, one of my friends that was a recruiter was hiring for somebody with her background. And, I had connected or made that connection, not because like, she sent me that olive oil, right? But like I, had her in my mind because, we had a great conversation and I really appreciated what she did. So obviously I wanted to reciprocate that. And she got hired for that position, right? Not because of the olive oil, but like that's kind of like I think how like people should be approaching like networking or building relationships. It's like it should always be like mutually beneficial rather than I and like I want this or me, right? So I think that's kind of like something that matters a lot when it comes down to networking.
okay. So, like, that made me think of a question, and I don't know, like, I hope this doesn't come off the right way, but in some way, I kind of feel like it's, like, manipulating or, like, I'm not really building a connection because I wanna be friends, it's more just like, I'm gonna wanna use you in the future, so I'm just gonna, like, butter you up for the next 6 months or something. I don't know, is that, like, a really cynical way to look at it, or is that just that's just life, that's the way it is?
Um, I mean, I think that there's some truth to what you're saying for sure, right? I do think that at the end of the day, like there's a professional. I mean, if you're talking to someone in a professional network or in a professional conversation, I think that for a lot of executives, obviously, like to some extent, you do think about, hey, maybe I might need this person in the future, right? But if that's like your sole intent, I think that's where like you'll not come off authentic and it won't work, right? But I do think that yes, obviously, like there's some truth to what you're saying. It's like the people that have the biggest or the largest network and that are very much like liked by a lot of people, like those would be typically the people that I work with that are like in the seven figures or like whatever salary ranges, right? Because there's just so many people that are advocating for them. So yeah, I do think that to some extent there's some truth to what you're like the way that you're seeing it. But I don't think that that's necessarily like the way that you have to view it, right? I think that, for example, I would go about networking in terms of like, hey, I want to help you. I just love to help you, right? And then if something happens or if something positive happens in the flip side, great, right? If not, like that's not the expectation that you should have, though, right?
Okay.
So yeah, I think that you definitely have some truth to what you're saying.
Yeah. I guess, like, it probably is, like, a really cynical way to look at it. It's more just, like, you do wanna build your network and build connections and have those
Right.
relationships, but be genuine about it, that your intention is to see, like, who out there can you be like, have a connection with, and maybe you help them, and then, like, yeah, because you're friends with somebody, naturally in the future, they might be able to help you too, but as long as your intentions are good, it'll come off in the right way. Because honestly, yeah, I guess if like, people can probably sense if you're only connecting so that you can use them, in which case it
Totally.
wouldn't work anyways. So,
Right.
yeah, okay, that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. No,
And
I agree.
it is true, like the saying, "It's not what you know, it's who you know." So, I've seen that play out so many times, so that's probably, like, it plays into this too.
Totally, 100%. And I mean, think about that even like, especially if you go into like, for example, financial services is like really hardcore about this, right? It is literally like, who do you know? Like that will determine like your, not like determine your career, but like it plays a huge role in what are the types of jobs that you get hired for, right? Or like who reaches out to you about like, hey, by the way, I'm currently like, I have this opening, you would be a great fit. Are you interested? So, and like obviously that stuff translates into like, a lot of other aspects of your life, right? But like not to just be, too focused on like the money, right? But like
Mhm.
if you think about it, like I had an example recently of somebody that was an executive director at Wells Fargo and somebody that he had, a great relationship that was like a former manager of his that moved into a different bank, reached out to him about a position that he ultimately got that was like a $200,000 raise, right? And so, and again, I'm not saying that's just because like he's great at networking, but like I think that people often underestimate like the power of just like having a fantastic network and like being liked by others. And obviously like being very good at your job, right? Like that is a good or big factor is like
Okay.
how are you while you're working? Like that matters a lot obviously as well. But I think that there's just so many people that are fantastic at their job, but that are not like moving up, right? Because they're just not good at like the social or like the relationship aspect of it, right? I do think
Okay.
it's very important, right?
Okay. Yeah, that was so actually my next question was gonna be, do qualifications even matter? Like, when you were a recruiter, like, looking for those roles, was it, like, just relationships or do the qualifications even matter? It sounds like they do, but I mean, like, what is it that
Right.
you were looking for,
Mm,
whenever you were sourcing or looking at candidates?
right. I think great question. And I think that there's like two different aspects of like recruiting. One of them is like the one that I had just mentioned of like, relationships and the hiring manager reaching out to, his contacts or whatever. And those are the people that get hired. But then the second aspect is like, as you mentioned, like, hey, we don't have anyone, now we need to have a recruiter that is actively searching or like sourcing for candidates and,
Yeah.
reaching out to them. Like there, yes, absolutely. Like, qualifications matter. And then like the biggest thing that matters is like your brand, right? Like if I am searching on LinkedIn, like we discussed earlier, right? Can I actually find you? And then B, like if I pop onto your profile, what does that look like to me, right? Can I understand that your background is X, Y, and Z, and that like here's your accomplishments and that you'd be a good fit for this position, right? Because I can tell you right now, if I were to go into LinkedIn Recruiter and if I just search like managing director, there's probably like 25 million people that are open to work, right? Who are like managing directors. So like, how am I going to filter out the people that are relevant by like looking into the keyword skills and like the things that I'm kind of hiring for? So that's why I think, like, yes, definitely like qualifications matter, but then also
Okay.
like how you sell those qualifications matters a lot, whether that be on your LinkedIn and resume.
Okay, okay, so, kind of, like, going back to what you were saying earlier is, like, all the normal job search stuff still applies, but that's, like, table
Mhm.
stakes, like,
Yeah.
of course, you're gonna be qualified and have all the skills, but, again, this is just, like, taking it a step further. Okay.
Yeah.
So then man, I do wanna dig more into that, although I'm not exactly sure what the question would be, but I just wanna, like, pick your brain, like, when you're in the LinkedIn Recruiter and you talked about, like, searching and filtering, like, what are you filtering by skills or, like, does the open to work badge matter? Does job title match matter? Like, what are some of the little intricacies of that search?
Okay, got it. Super cool question. And like to give you an example, the first thing that most recruiters will do is like search by job title. So like let's just say I'm looking for a chief financial officer, right? I will search by chief financial officer and then I will mark present, right? So like I want to have someone that is presently a or currently a chief financial officer, right? That's like a mistake number one that a lot of job seekers will do is like they were laid off, right? Let's say, now we're in October. Let's say you were laid off in July. And now I'm saying like, hey, my latest position was, chief financial officer, but I finished in July, right, of 2024.
Mhm.
If I'm searching on LinkedIn Recruiter for like people that are currently chief financial officers, you will not show up for me in that
Wow.
search, right? So
Okay.
like that's why like anyone that I revamp their profile, even if they're not actively working, I will have their most recent position marked as present so that if somebody searches for them, like they find them. And then, if somebody says, oh, I noticed that you actually haven't been in that position since July on your resume, but your
Mhm.
LinkedIn says present. Like you can always say, like, I don't really use social media too much. I must have not
Yeah.
updated yet or whatever but like you want to be showing up in the searches, right? So that's like one thing. And then the other thing is like definitely like keywords and skills, would matter. So for example, yeah, I might look for someone that has a lot of people management experience, right? That might be like a keyword. Or I might look for someone that has, like for example, again, like tying it back to like the finance positions like private equity background, right? Or venture capital or like whatever kind of like the industry specific like terms are for that particular search, those are the ones that you'd want to like ensure that you have them in your profile, right? And like the easiest thing if you're somebody that, either doesn't have the budget or like doesn't want to like pay someone to like do the resume, LinkedIn cover letter or the branding stuff, you can, also kind of get a first glimpse of that by doing it yourself, right? If you were to just copy paste like 10 job descriptions from like postings that you've applied to or that you're interested in and just paste those into ChatGPT, for example, or like any AI tool and say like, hey, these are jobs I'm interested in. What are the 10 to 20 common keywords and skills that you see inside these jobs? It'll give
Mhm.
you basically a good idea or like a very first idea on like what you should potentially be including in your profile, right? Obviously, like want to like tailor that for the recruiter searches, but it's better than nothing, right? Um,
Yeah, okay.
so yeah, those are things that definitely I think matter a lot in terms of branding.
Okay, okay. That's good to hear. Jobscan actually has a LinkedIn optimization tool that does that. So,
Okay, there you go.
um, shout out for that too. Okay, so that's all really interesting. One thing I thought of with the skills is that like, um, when you say like having on your profile, there's like the skills section within each work experience, like within each job you can list. So is it that shows up in the search, or is it just anywhere in like your summary headline? Like where should those skills be?
So like there's two sections that exist in LinkedIn Recruiter. One of them is keywords and the other one is skills, right? Skills are
Mhm.
like the top 5 skills that you can list like below your about section, like you can embed those
Okay.
into your
Yeah.
profile. That's one thing. And then obviously like also the skills that you list under each experience. And then
Okay.
keywords would be the ones that you've listed like in your headline, right? And then also like within your profile.
Okay. Okay, cool. Okay, so then couple of other things. Do recommendations matter? Like the
Oh,
number of
yeah,
recommendations? Like does that
gotcha.
excite you as a recruiter?
I love that question, and I think that like as so many other things, like it's in recruiting, it's like very much so like an opinion based,
Okay.
kind of like thing. Like personally, like I couldn't have cared less when I was a recruiter about like somebody recommending you, right?
Nice.
Just because, yeah, I mean, if I'm going through like 50 or 100 resumes a day, like trust me, I'm not spending the time to like scroll to the bottom of your profile and analyze
Mhm.
like who's recommended you, right? But
Okay.
I mean, there's other people that might say, oh, I
Yeah.
think that's cool or whatever, but like ultimately I think that what's gonna matter the most, like, or I wouldn't like invest too much energy in that. I would rather invest it in like networking and like building relationships and like reaching out for referrals. Like referrals is, for example, a different thing, right? Like that definitely has an
Mhm.
impact. If like you have somebody that's working at company X and you're applying there, to ask for a referral, but then not just ask for a referral, but like that's where like most people will stop. It's like to ask, hey, would you also be open to introducing me to the hiring manager or the recruiter that's hiring for this job via an email thread, for example? Like that stuff that, yeah, that has an impact, right? But I don't necessarily think
Okay.
that like LinkedIn recommendations are going to be like a big deal for anyone other than if you're like a service provider. Like, for example, me as in like a coach or like resume
Yeah,
writer, like,
okay.
yeah, a lot of people will have a look into the recommendations, right?
Okay. And then do number of connections matter when you're looking at a profile?
Oh no, I don't think that matters at all. I mean, the only thing
Oh,
that
okay.
I mean, there's no reason why that would matter. The only way that or the reason why that matters is it makes it easier for you. Like obviously the bigger your network, the more people you can
Yeah,
reach out
yeah.
to or whatever. But I guess like the only way that would matter is like if you don't have a profile picture, you don't have anything on your profile and you have like zero connections.
Hmm,
Obviously I can't see anything, right? But I don't think the number of connections has an impact on the recruiting process at
okay.
all.
Okay, okay. Okay, so earlier you kinda mentioned, like, you briefly touched on a step-by-step process for the executive job search. This
Mhm.
is probably, like, a lot of what you do with clients when you're helping them to get an executive job. Can
Right.
you break down again, like, what that step-by-step framework of an executive job search is?
Right. Yeah, I definitely can. I think that again, it depends on like who you are and like what stage of your career you are in. But I think that the
Okay.
biggest difference, like for executives, then like compared to like others, is that most others will typically, be in the stage of like, oh, I lost my job or I've been laid off. I need to find a job ASAP, right? Versus like executives, most of the time, you know, they have the financial cushion and like they have the experience where they're like, hey, I want to find my next big job and I want to make sure that it's the right one and the right company and the right environment. So like they get to be like more selective, I guess. And like part of that is like obviously like the financial aspect of like, oh, I don't have, yes, I have bills to pay, but like I have the money for it. But the other things also, like I've been in business for so many years. I'm not going to work for someone or somewhere that, isn't going to be like what I love. Right. So I think the
Okay.
first step in executive search is always figuring out what is that next step, right? What do you want to do? What are some of the 20, 30 companies that you're interested in? What are the two, three job titles that we'll be targeting? And once you have that clarity, now we're, drafting your resume, LinkedIn cover letter, right? And seeing like, how does that, and tying that all into like the jobs that you're targeting, right? Once you have the brand and the resume, all of the materials ready, next step would be, okay, now we're starting with networking, right? With like the people that we mentioned in terms of like going through your network, right? Whether that be with that Excel or like if you have, something written
Mhm.
down manually or like even connecting with new people. And then, a third step is, okay, now we're submitting simultaneously, submitting to those 30, 40 different search firms so that everyone has you on file, right? And then after that happens, then you're slowly but surely like applying for positions, generating traction, networking, obviously simultaneously asking for referrals and stuff, and then preparing for interviews, making sure that your pitch, right? So like tell me about yourself. Why do you want to join this company? What's your salary expectations? That those questions like are really, really good so that you're selling yourself effectively. And then last stage, is ultimately like salary negotiation stage where again, I think that's something that is a huge difference in like the executive search versus like a regular search is that I
Mhm.
mean, there's not so much room for like negotiation if you're going for like, a junior analyst or like an analyst or like whatever kind of like, 60 to 100K position, right? There's not so much
Mhm.
room versus like if you're someone that's at the executive level, like I have, for example, seen, some of my clients push like they were in a 500K position. They got a new offer that was like at 600. And then it was like, with bonus or like RSUs pushed to like 650 or 700. Right. And that's like a big difference, obviously. Right.
Yeah.
And like the way that you approach that, process of like negotiating your offer as well is, is a big difference. Right. So,
Mhm.
yeah, that's, I guess, the step by step. But obviously
Okay.
it'll depend on like every person, right?
Yeah. I would love to be able to be in a room negotiating for going from 600 to 650. I just that would be so great. Yeah. Okay, so that was a lot. I think a lot of it, like, kind of is, like, the pieces that we had talked about. Um, Basically, it's like it's a whole other world. It requires a lot of, like, going above and beyond kinda thing. How long does that process usually take when you're going for an executive role?
Oh, that's a great question. And the reason why I love that question actually is that most people that kind of like do what I do, like the resume writing or
Mhm.
coaching, will like have that brand of like, oh, we're gonna get you hired in like 30 days, we're gonna get you hired in like
Wow.
60 days or whatever. And like whenever I see that, I know instantly like this person has zero experience in recruiting. And it's just like a marketing thing, right? Because like typically the executive search will like on average, like anyone that I'll work with, like 4 to 6 months, right?
Wow.
Because like it takes time to like generate traction, it takes more time. And B, like it takes time to find the right opportunities. And then even once you start generating traction, like on average, there will be like, unfortunately, like 5 to 7 rounds of interviews, right? And that takes time as well, right? So like sometimes from that first touch point you have with the recruiter until you get like an offer, like that typically sometimes will take like 2 months, right? So,
Wow.
if you're someone that's like out there looking for someone to like revamp your resume and stuff, if they're telling you you're going to get hired within like 30, 60 days, don't believe it. It's BS.
Okay. Okay, I will keep that in mind, and also I think that like, when people ask, "How long is the average, job search?" It's so hard to say because it's like, well, what it depends on the role that you're applying for, like, if you're going for entry level or maybe, like, going into leadership, that's a certain window. If you're going for an executive role, it could take, like, 6 months or something, so
Totally.
there's a lot of variables, it seems like.
Totally. And even like the position or like what you're doing matters a lot as well, right? For example, the worst positions right now of like people that I'm coaching that, I kind of have seen over the past 2 years, like chief revenue officers, for example, or like sales people that are sales leaders, right? Like those types of roles right now are being like eliminated because like that's just how the market is. And like I've, seen people that are like on the market for, 1 year, 2 years even because it's
Mhm.
just so hard to find like a position that at that
Wow.
level, for these types of people. And then you have like chief, CFOs or COOs, for example, that are getting hired like super easy right now if you're doing it
Mhm.
right, right? Like 3, 4 months, right? So yeah, totally. The market matters a lot as well. And obviously it's not a great market right now.
Okay, okay. Well, this was great. I can't believe it's already been almost 45 minutes. That flew by. There was just so much information there. So thank you for sharing your insights. Again, please share where people can find you, connect with you, or work with you.
Appreciate it. No, it was great to connect, and I'm so glad that we did this, by the way, as well. And I think that hopefully it'll be of value to anyone that's listening.
Yeah.
And yeah, for anyone obviously that wants to connect, my website is csgexecutivecoaching.com, and I look forward to chatting with you.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for being on.